fun, and Ken is a great friend to Barbie.
There's no empathy measure on most people's performance reviews. But if you don't have that, I think it's almost impossible to be an excellent marketer.
I was just this fat unit, you know what I mean, in a suit, and it was clear that I was not the same as the others.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the WFA's Better Marketing. And what better person to start with in our new season than Cristina Diezhandino, who is the WFA Global Marketer of the Year, as well as being the CMO of Diageo. Cristina, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, David. Glad to be here with you and looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, so am I. Listen, so much to talk about, but let's get right at it. I mean, what an incredible career you've had, but I'm always interested in how people started out. So how did you start out in marketing? Where did you start? What attracted you in the first place? That's three questions in one.
So look, I am originally from Spain, and I studied economics at a place called ICADE in Madrid. Last year of that university, I got the opportunity to go to France and study a bit of marketing, which in those days was relatively, in my university for sure, a little bit kind of, pioneering world. Because I did that, I got acquainted with companies like Unilever, and very quickly I applied to be a marketing trainee after university, which then I joined, and I was in Unilever for the first 11 years of my career. So it was, exciting, a discovery, and I really loved the fact that marketing was all about understanding consumers, understanding in those days how they wash their clothes, and having businesses satisfy and respond to what consumers needed. So that was the beginning, and then I've been in marketing almost ever since. I've had a couple of roles that were in general management as well, but marketing has been my career.
How fantastic. And what better place to start than the School of Marketing, Unilever. Many a great marketeer. In fact, many of your predecessors as Marketer of the Year are ex-Unilever folk, or were Unilever folk. So at Diageo, you've also had many roles, and in a way, the ones I'm really interested to talk about are the ones in emerging markets, because your dearly departed CEO was a big fan of the reverse mentoring of what you could learn from emerging markets and bring back to the mainstream. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences and possibly touch on that reverse mentoring idea as well?
Sure. I mean, I've had my first emerging market experience, actually I had it with Unilever. I worked in a company which at the time was called Unilever Market Development Company. It was based in Bristol. And my job was Senior Brand Manager, Latin America and Israel. And the markets that I was in charge of were Dominican Republic, Cuba, Bolivia, and Paraguay, and then Israel. Oh. And at that time, those markets were very underdeveloped when it came to, businesses, infrastructure, research facilities, advertising agencies, and so forth. And so I was working in a place where Unilever was actually either acquiring or venturing in new places. And it was really like a deep dive into what you do when resources are not as available or less available than you thought. And perhaps the capabilities around you are different. And so how do you borrow resources from neighboring countries? How do you leverage the expertise of your company to do something that in other places is very straightforward, but not so much in that place? So that was crash course in emerging market very early on in my career. Then with Diageo, I've had a couple of big roles in, certainly one that I was Marketing Innovation Director for Diageo Africa. That was in 2009. I did that job for about 3.5 years. It was a fabulous experience. From a Diageo point of view, the portfolio, still today, but certainly at that time, was more geared towards beer than it was towards spirits. But at the same time, how do you grow the spirits business and having, the possibility of creating impact in a place where, perhaps at that time, the infrastructure for marketing was not quite there. I did a lot of work in capability building from our teams. You may know that in Diageo we have something called the Diageo way of brand building.
Oh, yes, indeed.
And so we did a lot of work with, we call it dweeb. And so we
name.
did a lot of dweeb work in that space, which was phenomenal because people were so keen to learn, and Diageo, as Unilever would be, it's truly a school of marketing. I also did a lot of work with agencies, and so creative people that would be being mentored actually from perhaps their hometown, wherever else, into that new spaces, so that we could create local content that was fit for purpose for those brands. But at the same time, truly understanding the power of what we know well, which is understanding consumers in the places where they drink our brands. And so for me, that was a phenomenal experience to, be closer to consumers, what you learned about, what it means to satisfy those needs, etc. And the ability to create an impact, both in our own teams and with the brands. So I love that. It was early days of, we didn't say ESG back then, but we launched this project called Water for Life. We were doing water projects in many of the Africa markets where our footprint is very substantial. And again, that was my early days into understanding how brands and companies create phenomenal impact in the communities where we operate. That program has since developed much further, but I was lucky to be present and be part of the early days of all of that. I remember also in Africa, one of the things that I did was, to your point of reverse mentoring, talk about what Africa could bring to the rest of the Diageo. And in those days, for example, now everything is digital, but back then, much less so. And yet, for example, in East Africa, there was already a lot of money transfer through mobile phones. A big company called M-Pesa was doing all of that. So that realization that cultures and communities can leap forward and not have to go through the technological transition in the same way that you would imagine if you've worked in the US or in Europe alone, so that you don't have to wait for all those steps to happen. You can go straight to, a middle or end of that line and then have a different way of interacting with consumers. So we would do promotions that had to do with that were activated through mobile phones at a time where in Europe we weren't doing that kind of thing. So I also took that opportunity to demonstrate and showcase what an emerging market reality can teach us for other places. My other role in emerging markets was actually in Latin America, and that was not a marketing role. I was a general manager for Caribbean and Central America, so that was 37 geographies of very small markets, many of them. Fabulous, a lot of fun. For me personally, it was a lot of fun as well because, of course, most of them speak Spanish, and it was an opportunity to work in my native language once again, which was phenomenal. And also a more commercial approach to our relationship with distributors. In that case, our route to market is for the most part through distributors. These distributor organizations are many times family-owned businesses. Many of them have been distributing our brands for generations, and they're so proud of having, the grandfather was the first person who brought Johnny Walker into Guatemala or wherever else. And there's a lot of pride, which is a really valuable asset. And so this idea of how do you partner with people, getting the best out of that, and as a partnership truly driving business performance in different places. At that time, for example, it's a very big Scotch business in Latin America, as you may know. But one of the big things that I did was actually drive what we now call premiumization. So growing the upper part of that category, because people in many of those markets understand that to celebrate a special occasion, a high-end whiskey actually does the job better than anything else. So again, a phenomenal opportunity for me, and one that we took elsewhere. So following that role, I was in charge of all our reserve portfolio in Diageo, and I was able to grow that business. I got many of those insights from that experience.
And this, the transition to general management from marketing is often something that marketers pain over. It never struck me as that big a deal, but interesting that you travelled back into marketing. I mean, what have you taken out of general management and kept as a real focus in marketing that you might not have had before?
I think the most important thing for me, and perhaps I learned this very early on in my career, this notion that the brand manager is the general manager of the brand. My first role in marketing was in laundry detergents. Laundry detergents is a business of much lower margin. And so even at the very beginning, I was very conscious of understanding the manufacturing process and what constitutes the cost and what kind of value you can put in a promotion to make it affordable for the business and so forth. So I think this idea of really understanding the end-to-end, not just what consumers necessarily engage with, but truly what the business is holistically for that brand or for that portfolio. I think I had that idea very clearly. In fact, I used that idea when I asked for my general manager role. I thought, I had a very commercial mindset all my life, therefore I should be able to do a GM role. But you're right, it's not always obvious or apparent that is a very natural progression. To me it was, and I did it, but at the same time, experiencing it in the first hand, it's an incredibly valuable experience. I would absolutely recommend, if someone fancies doing it, go ahead and do it. I think, what you take back, I came back to marketing through our reserve portfolio. It's the luxury end of our portfolio. And a big part of the success of that portfolio for us has been that we've had a very holistic approach to it. And by that I mean there's commercial realities that will be slightly different from how you approach the rest of our brands. And so, for example, really segmenting what we call the on-trade, so bars and restaurants in a very specific way, having programs that address the higher end of that channel, having programs that approach the ambassadors in that instance, which are the bartenders. For example, we have this big contest, it's called World Class, and every year we choose the best cocktail maker in the world. This competition is coming up. Actually, this year's is in Sao Paulo at the end of this month. I'm looking forward to that. It's a lot of fun. But also, it really brings forward the idea of how the commercial realities of your brand, your portfolio, indeed your company, are so intrinsically connected to what we understand as marketing, meaning what consumers see, experience, and interact. And so I think, I personally think I see it as a continuum. There's, it's about emphasis or focus, but certainly you cannot live in marketing in isolation of every other part of your function or the functions in your company.
Fantastic answer, Cristina. And who's the current holder of this Cocktail Maker of the Year? And what's their winning cocktail? Sidebar here. Shouldn't be doing that.
Well, look, I won't reveal the secret because this it's coming up. But I'll tell you what. We are evolving every year. We evolve our challenges. They have to go through a series of challenges, and some of them remain. Some of them evolve every year. The one that it's a highlight for me personally is a speed rack, and so they have to prepare classic cocktails. Perhaps 4 of them. Again, I won't reveal the ideas for this year, but in record time.
Okay.
And a very important piece, obviously, we look at the big categories that participate in the making of that cocktail. So there's a big Johnny Walker participation. There's the rest of our single malts. We've got tequilas, Don Julio and Casamigos. We've got Kettle One vodka. You know our brands, Tanqueray 10. There's phenomenal cocktail making happening across all of those categories and brands. But I think one of the things that is for me a big highlight is when you see people participate in these challenges, it's not just about the technical ability, which is out of this world and an incredible amount of creativity, but it's also measured against their ability to entertain their customer. And so by that, I would be people like you and me. So if you go there and be present whenever they're preparing their participating cocktail, they will also be talking to you. And in the way that they would do if you were to this a beautiful, on-trade outlet here in London or elsewhere. And so it's truly, we call it hospitality because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to, in the next few weeks, it's super exciting. It's a bit nerve-wracking. It's a big celebration. It's a lot of fun.
I bet. Sounds like a terrible event to have to attend. Poor you. Have to go to Sao Paulo. Anyway, can I perhaps shift emphasis a little bit? I know, you took over from the wonderful Sil Sala back in 2020, and she left an incredible legacy of discipline and structure and creativity and focus on effectiveness, but also a great team. But without being too over-flattering, as I've talked to your team, they say you've taken it to a whole different level, and that how you've done that is by the real focus on the human being. And I always remind people that nothing happens without building great teams and working with great people. What's your secret there, Cristina? Because you've clearly done something very special.
Oh, thank you so much, David. That's very kind of you. And so, look, we've talked a lot. You've mentioned effectiveness and creativity. And really, we coined this term creativity with precision very purposefully because, that... And I see that in many of my colleagues in other companies as well. To me, this is a perfect combination and one that cannot be kind of dismissed or taken for granted at all. And sometimes I've seen even ourselves really focus a lot on the creative aspect of things, which is wonderful, and I'm full of admiration for creative minds. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we convince our executive teams and our boards that we need to invest in the brands, and the way in which you convince people is by proving the case. So that's the piece that we call precision, and we've invested a lot in tools and capabilities, etc. And so creativity with precision was kind of, when I took on the role, as I said, I coined these words with the team in a real attempt to be super clear. This is going to be our North Star. Our brands are amazing, phenomenal, hundreds of years, some of them, and we will conquer hearts and minds, but always surprising, always delighting, and creativity does that for us. However, we need to be precise as well, because, the world has gotten a lot more fragmented. You could get lost in many consumer touch points, and also, frankly, I wanted us to invest more behind our brands in advertising and promotion, and we got it. And the way in which we got it was through real, very grounded articulation of what return our investment actually does provide. But having said all of that, if you remember, you've mentioned when I took on the role just as the pandemic kicked off. It was quite challenging. It was challenging for everybody, of course. But I think in our industry, the particular challenge came from the fact that almost half of our business is in the world that I just described earlier. Bartenders, bars, restaurants, events, festivals, and having all of that be closed from one day to the next. Well, it was like a huge setback, But in that context, I think we said, look, the truth is, we see that, and I call it, a mindset of possibility. There's so much that can happen, will happen. We've just been surprised by the circumstances in a way that was totally unimaginable. And for that reason, the totally unimaginable can happen now, and we can hopefully channel to really achieve what we've always said we want to do. That is the core of our business is celebration. And so if you believe that whatever the circumstances, people will want to celebrate whatever's happening, small celebrations, big celebrations. And if you remember, now it feels almost like science fiction to me even, when I think back, those days, We were having all these Zoom events, even with our families. I was seeing my brothers. I had the baptism of my nephew on Zoom, and we prepare our cocktails.
Yeah.
And of course, we were able to figure out very quickly through understanding search, etc., that cocktail making was in the rise. And it was really pivoting towards at home. We did a lot more work in that space. In fact, we did leverage some of our bartender community to create possibilities for them, but also engagement for consumers. So I think this, at the end of the day, this notion of humanity, David, that you've mentioned, for me, certainly in our industry, it's all about human connections, right? That's what celebration is all about. It could be that today is Friday afternoon and we want to celebrate the end of the week, or the weather in London is amazing and why don't we go to the beach somewhere? Whatever it might be. It's our birthday or a big anniversary, or just, you feel a bit tired and you want to go out and see some friends. So whichever the reason, and we articulate all of the things that I just talked about in the context of, we call them occasions.
Yeah.
What are the occasions? What's the value pool within that occasion? And how do we best respond to that occasion through our brands and the cocktails or the serves that happen through the brands?
And then I think the other thing worth mentioning for everybody listening is I've always found Diageo, in whatever guise of leadership, to be remarkably generous in sharing your learnings, your models, your thinking. So this notion of creativity with precision, which I think is really powerful, and especially, the proof point is you're getting more money because you're proving the effectiveness, and it's a virtuous circle. It's good for the planet, it's good for profit, it's good for people. Do you share those models, Cristina? Would you be willing to show people what you've been up to?
Absolutely. I mean, in the context of WFA, and David, you know that I became a member of the exec of WFA when I took on the role. I think it's a fabulous forum, and many of my team participate in different facets of the work that is happening, which I think it's incredibly valuable. And of course, we've done sharing of the frameworks that we did, for example, for diversity fairly early on. We've gotten all our work on media and media diversity in media, etc. Absolutely delighted to do that, indeed.
Fantastic, and thank you for the generosity. But I remember back in Athens, I think, when Isabel won the prize for better marketing using the representation framework and the changes you've made in media to think about, are your messages going in the right place, and is the media doing the job it should? So, I mean, I think your winning WFA Marketer of the Year is on behalf of all of your team. We both know that, but especially the way you've championed them, which I think is fantastic to see. And I think the WFA will tell me that this is true, that your presentation in Istanbul this year is available for people to view. And
right.
I really think they should, because the couple of things in there that I loved was the brand building you've continued to do. With Johnny Walker, it's still keep walking wherever it is in the world. And you showed some great work from Africa, which was really bringing that idea to life in a very different way. So, you continue to do great work. But perhaps also, while we're on the WFA, let's talk a little bit about the planet and the pledge. Because in addition to all of this, you're doing everything you can to do things in the right way and to focus on the sustainability agenda as well. Could you talk a little bit about that, Cristina? Talk about what the pledge means for Diageo?
I mean, so look, we've taken on this topic incredibly to heart. Certainly, I have personally, but Diageo wrote in 2020 these very big commitments, 2030 Spirit of Progress, that's how we call them, the goals, 25 goals in the 3 areas of ESG, and they're really bold. And so when it comes to climate change specifically, there's tremendous progress in scope 1 and 2 for Diageo. All our sites will be carbon neutral by 2030. We will reduce 50% of our scope 3 footprint by that time. And we have had a lot of work now through the brands, because one of the big ahas for me was look, the company will do many things, of course, and invest very substantially across, a lot of our supply footprint with our suppliers, etc. But when it comes to engaging consumers, the brands are the vehicle to do that. And at times, the conversation may not seem obvious. And I'll give you an example. We decided that, if you think about Scope 3, one of the biggest pillars of Scope 3 is in our industry is agriculture. And we took on Guinness as the brand that would be the voice for what that means. And we launched some pilot programs with different farmers in different parts of the world, but specifically in Ireland. We did that given the size of the brand in the country. And the question comes, will consumers care about regenerative agriculture? And it may seem very few will, at least for now. Eventually, a lot more people will. And we know this from various studies, that the degree of interest is only growing. And whilst the deep know-how may sit with a fewer, smaller percent of consumers today, we know that that's going to change very, very quickly. But at the same time, we were talking about creativity earlier. We know that we can use the power of our brands and the power of our creative partners to portray, what that means. And there's the value in soil, the richness in soil, and inevitably, when you are able to experience that, and we will do also work within our Guinness storehouse in Dublin to portray that, then you very quickly, almost intuitively think, well, if this cereal is a raw material of this amazing brand and it's created in a way that is a lot more sustainable, rich, natural, there's something that says to each one of us, this is going to be, better. It's a synonym of quality. It's a synonym of quality of life. And I think this is a way in which we can, as brands, be voices of the changes that need to happen, that require a lot of effort, a lot of investment by companies, but will be, for the good of the planet.
Yeah.
So that's only one example. As you know, we're doing a lot more on media. We're piloting different efforts, partnering with different companies to make sure that we achieve what we've said. We want to reduce our Scope 3 footprint by 50% in 2030. And 2030 is not far at all. We're already at the end of 23.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to be done.
There is indeed. Anyway, Cristina, to stick to the promise, can I just say, ha sido un placer hablar contigo y muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimo gusto.
A ver si hablamos un poquito de español para nuestra audiencia.
Cuando tú quieras.
No. That's enough of that.
Thank you so
anyway,
much.
Cristina, thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you again very soon. Take care.
Thank you, David.
Bye. Well, what a fantastic conversation that was, and very much looking forward to our next Better Marketing podcast, which will be with the newly anointed Deputy President of the WFA, Jane Wakely, who's the global CMO of PepsiCo. So from alcohol to soft drinks, and no doubt some fabulous better marketing lessons. Take care.